We hope you enjoy the presentation. Please visit our YouTube channel for other meeting presentations and discussions. Search Boston Audio Society and subscribe.
Okay, Nick, you're on board.
All right. Hey, welcome to the meeting.
No, they're all.
We're going to start with the open forum and try and limit it to 20 minutes so that we can keep things moving along. And so open forum time. Anybody?
Well, don't know, speak at once.
Tom Parazella, you gonna tell us about your room, I hope. At least a little bit, anyway.
Okay, I just had to unmute myself. I'm sorry, I was checking something else. I think I mentioned the room before. I've got a bunch of sound treatments that I just finished putting in, including in certain places absorbers, other places combination absorbers and diffusers depending on the frequency, some diffusers overall, and some corner traps. Al, did I send you the printouts of the ETC and did I send you those curves?
No, so you've already had Gary analyze your room or what?
No, Larry is, I've got to get a hold of Larry to redo the DEQX Express 2 because that was set up for my room in Maryland. And now, of course, the room is totally different and I haven't gotten to him yet.
Oh, okay.
So I'm hoping to do that in the next couple of weeks.
So what are the curves you have?
I sent you impulse response curves, I thought, and the ETC curves. And the first curve was of the room untreated. The next set of curves was the room with just the absorbers, then with the absorbers and the diffusers, and finally with the absorbers, diffusers, and base traps.
The results? I mean,
Yeah, the results. I thought I had sent those to you. If I
haven't seen them.
Okay, I'll make sure you get them.
And what did it show? Increasing?
Well, a huge, even in the first step with just the absorbers, there was a huge reduction in early reflections, and also the energy time curve dropped down to 50 dB and I think it was 180 milliseconds. So big decrease in things that were just bouncing around the room. And then the diffusers further reduced the impulse response anomalies because it basically broke up some of this stuff. Not too much of a difference in the corner base treatments. I don't think I had a problem there to start with. Just initial impressions. The details are not getting stepped on by the early reflections. The image jumped away from the speakers into the room. My wife, who is a more astute listener than I am, walked in one day and says, well, gee, the people are right there. And then she put another recording and said, oh, that's very two-dimensional. She said, why can't everybody do the recordings like the first one? And I started, it's like, okay, we know about that.
Right.
But initial response is quite good. The room wasn't too bad to start with. The ETC curve dropping down to 50 dBs down was about 400 milliseconds, but it went from 400 down to 180. So it's an improvement.
Okay, sounds good.
That's what they said.
More comments?
What did you go with? Did you go with fiberglass or did you use rock wool?
These were a series of absorbers and diffusers and so forth that I did not build. You know, my knowledge of room acoustics is very limited. So I researched a number of companies, and the one that seemed to have the easiest thing to deal with this company out in Novato, California, near San Francisco, called Sonitus, Sonitus USA. They have an application where you can go in and put in your room dimensions, and then I sent them the architectural drawings of the room, and then I sent them the layout of the furniture and the speakers, and I also sent photographs, and they came back with a plan of where to put the various diffusers and absorbers and so forth. And that included absorbers and diffusers on the ceiling, and also the walls. And again, as I said, the corner traps, which didn't seem to make a whole lot of difference in this particular room. But again, the reason I went with them is I don't have the experience in room acoustics to do it. I think myself in a way that was as good as what they did.
Are there adjacent rooms next to your listening area? And do you get a lot of crosstalk over into the other rooms?
Well, 2 of the walls are to the outside. 2 of the other walls are to the house. But on the walls that are to the house, when we built the house, we put a layer of, what is it? I can't remember the name of the absorbing material in back of the drywall. So I can tell you that my wife can be sitting in the family room, and she can tell I'm playing something. I had Pink Floyd on the other day, the wall at about 110 dB. She said, I heard something was playing. I could sort of feel the bass notes, but I couldn't tell what it was. So the isolation is pretty good from the rest of the house. That's also helped by the fact that the house is very long. It's almost all on one floor because we're getting old and I didn't want to be climbing stairs. But we have 2 HVAC systems, one for the main part of the house and the second for the audio room, a hallway, and our upstairs guest bedrooms. So there are no AC ducts that run between the sound room and the rest of the house, other than the upstairs when nobody's hardly ever there.
Tom, do you have patents on LED lighting around the house? What did you do?
I wish. I have a patent on a low-cost LED lighting solution, but it has never been picked up. It is like the old story between Tesla and Edison. Edison was in first, and Tesla had a better idea at that time, but he tried to get it accepted, and George Westinghouse got involved with Tesla, and George Westinghouse at the time had more money than God because the railroad air brake patents he had. And from my understanding, he almost went broke displacing the DC with Edison because Edison was first. I've had a lot of people interested in the patent, but it is not just an item, it's a major system change, and so far nobody has the wherewithal or the desire to take it on. But it would essentially reduce the cost of lighting in, let's say, an industrial building by about 90%.
But did you implement any in your house at all?
Yeah, I did a prototype in my last house in Maryland, and it worked incredibly well. Like I said, it would be a major cost savings, but the lighting manufacturers, the socket manufacturers, the wire manufacturers, the standards, everything would have to change. It's like a 10,000 pound elephant you have to eat.
But you did not send any sound measurements to this company.
Yes, I did. I sent my measurements back to the manufacturer of the treatments, Sonitus. And I will be writing it up in it'll be in the July issue of Audio Express magazine. The whole project and the measurements and
a much inferior publication to the BAS speaker.
Yeah, the only thing is they don't pay me a lot, but they do pay me, the BAS speaker.
No, and it's not inferior. I was trying to make a feeble joke.
No, that's good. I appreciate that. I've been writing for Audio Express and Speaker Builder and Audio
we know.
for over 25 years. So it's just you know, it's an avocation. Obviously not trying to make a living out of it.
Did you consider spray foam as a sound absorber?
Did not consider that again because I don't have the knowledge to decide what works and what doesn't work. And I didn't want to get involved with making major changes to room and essentially reinvent the wheel. The gentleman who did all that work is, I think his name is Tony Gramani, and he's got all kinds of awards for rooms and room treatments. And the people are very wonderful to work with. And being essentially a neophyte at that, I said, I'm not going to do that. I've been down the road doing it myself too many times where I didn't know what I was doing. I'll stick with things that I do know, like speaker building and things like that.
Did you pay them an equipment fee or a combined consulting equipment installation?
Actually, I paid them just for the treatments that I bought. They were very kind. When I told them what I was trying to do, they were very kind to help me out. But they do have a lot of stuff online that will help you step through it. If you want to do something, you know, really deeply involved, I'm sure. I know for a fact they have an engineering service, but you're going to have to pay for it.
Richard,
You
don't
use
worry.
Yeah.
You've been living with your new TV, projection Sony TV, with 10,000 lumens for what, 2 weeks now?
I don't remember. It's all history.
Any comments?
It's like the brightness makes it like you're actually outside when you're in an outside scene. At first I thought there was something wrong. Then I realized, oh, I'm just seeing what it looks like when you're outside.
Do you wear shades?
Anyway.
I was shocked. I didn't remember. I haven't been outside in so long. I forgot what it was.
Do you have to wear shades?
Well, no, I've gotten away from that, but I haven't tried 3D yet. That's what I'm really excited about.
No, I have been told getting too high a lumen for the room can give you a headache. Do you have any?
I have lots of headaches. I don't need any. No, it doesn't give you too many. It doesn't give you a headache. I mean, if I tried, I probably could make the room totally dark and turn the brightness totally up, and then see what happened. But
You don't do that.
I won't do that.
What is the
Yeah, you don't want to go
exact
blind,
model of
Richard.
that one?
No, the advice is don't look at the laser. Pretend it's the sun. You don't want to look at it.
Or not look at sun. What is the model of that, Richard?
Expensive.
Do not look into laser with remaining eye.
No, it's a complicated number. It's not a nice, easy number. It looks like, which annoys me because I think it should be like 100,000. It should be the Model 1000 or the Model 10 or something.
Can we see you pose like Trump in the eclipse?
What?
Remember Trump staring at the eclipse?
No, I would. I'm sorry it missed him. I was rooting for the virus, of course. Where the hell was the virus when we needed it?
Well, he got that recombinant DNA stuff, and it really knocked the disease out, and it still does.
Boy, what a mistake that was. I mean, you can take ethical medicine just too far sometimes. Can you imagine being Hitler's doctor? Oh, even his barber, you know, cutting his throat, you know, so.
Yeah.
But no politics here. This is a non-political event.
Yeah, let's go apolitical, Richard. Come on.
No political. It's just biblical. Evil. You know, we're talking about evil here. But I'll tell you something. It's really great to watch stuff. But the novelty wears off, and it just looks like this is how it's supposed to look. And so everything else kind of looks kind of dull.
Al, if I could interrupt, I just want to mention one more thing about this project behind me. I really got lucky because not only were the acoustic results good, but when we were building the house, my wife had a designer work on a lot of things in the house. And the designer came in to take some pictures in the house the other day. She walked in the room and she says, "Oh my God, those look so cool. They look like art." And my wife just beamed. So that saved, it saved my butt, let me tell you.
I can believe it.
Well,
What is the name again of the expert at Sonatus who helped you?
Tony Grimani, Grimani.
Thank you.
You used the
Put it in
figure
the chat
110.
box. Type it into the chat box.
Tom P., you cited the figure 110, and I'm wondering if that's a measurement because that's just extraordinarily loud.
Well,
I mean, 100 is extraordinarily loud. And
those
110
that is not average. Those are peaks, obviously, but there are times. In fact, I've also noticed some incredibly high peaks on like Mahler's Second, where the symphonies come in and smash. So there are.
So the
peaks.
answer is these are measurements.
Those are measures. Yes.
Okay.
How quick is the peak response though? Because there can be instantaneous peaks that are very. Renee Yeager showed us this once upon a time. There can be instantaneous peaks that are that you don't really even notice. But the meter has to be fast.
I've done it several ways. I've done it with a meter, but I've also done it. I've got an ACO 7012 mic, and I've run it into my scope and to find some obviously very small peaks. And what amazes me is there's some high frequency transients that are every big in peak amplitude, obviously not in duration, but in peak amplitude as you get with bass. I mean, somebody comes up and does a rim shot on a cymbal or something. And
well, one of the discussions, Tom, we're going to have later on is about the new proposal for AES, and that's hymnoids. And they point out that the highest peak is in the high frequencies.
Yes,
the higher frequency.
I've read the paper and I agree with it. I've seen that myself with incredibly high short-term transients, but nonetheless they're there. But I'm running sufficient power on those speakers that I've actually put a scope on some of the transients. The speakers, the amplifiers are not going into clipping.
I can attest to that as well because I record and I did a jazz band, a high school jazz band. And while I was there, I measured 110 dBs. And when I got home, I could play it at 110 as well. And it sounded really live.
Was that 110 dB RMS or peak?
No, not RMS.
Oh, God,
well, the needle bounces around, but it reaches that and registers the highest level recorded, in the digits below there. And
so it's a peak hold meter.
No. It's just the app on the phone, Audio Tools app. It looks like a Radio Shack meter, but it's an app.
One of the tricks I've used when I do my recordings is, of course, I'm doing digital these days, and I generally wind up getting the, if you will, I guess you'd call it the 2D full volume level of an orchestra, because I do mostly classical recording. I get that around 20 dB down from full scale. And that gives me headroom for the transients and stuff. In other words, if you're playing like all the strings are playing and the brass are playing, and then there's suddenly a cymbal crash or somebody whacks the bass drum or something, that gives you 20 dB of headroom over the average level. And I so far have seen very few times when I've had problems with it. However, I am familiar with a recording that we're still trying to find at this point that Dave Weinberg did a while back using the DBX 700 system way back in the day with, I believe, Shep's microphones. And he was getting, it was a piece that was done up in New York State by Crumb. And they were literally banging 8-inch iron pipes with hammers and so forth. And they were getting peak levels that were approaching total distortion, up around 130 dB.
Oh, that sounds like music.
Well, it didn't exactly sound like music, but boy, it sure sounded like a machine foundry.
Oh, Yeah.
That's Crum's famous feast for plumber and dolphin.
Something like that, yeah. By the way, the Sony TV, I looked it up on Bit, and it came up on Bitdefender. The model number is V as in Victor, P as in Peter, L as in Larry, dash, G as in Goodness, T as in Thomas, Z as in Zounds, 380. And they claim 10,000 lumens.
Is they have three lasers or two lasers? Do you know?
I don't know. The details aren't here on the specifics about it that I've read. I just quickly looked it up.
Yeah, that's the one.
But it does look like a beast.
Well, it looks exactly like the one it replaced. That's which is still a current product.
Yeah, it sounds like it might well compare with some of the Barco light cannons that are used in motion picture theaters.
Well, this is
Richard, it's the one that's right behind you, correct? If you take
Yeah.
your head down, we can all see it, right?
Yeah.
How big is the
Right.
screen?
I'm blinded by the lasers.
Yeah, it's off, right? Safety first. Be careful.
Yeah, let me put my glasses on.
Yeah, right.
There is no
Write it
screen
in the
behind
chat
it.
box.
That's the
What?
projector behind him.
right. It's the projector behind me. The screen's at the other end of the room.
Yeah.
How big is it?
Who? The projector or the screen?
The screen.
I can never remember. But it's basically it's configured as 2.35 to 1, so it's very wide, and the room is around 15, 16 feet wide,
So it's a billboard.
and whatever the height is that makes it 2.35 to 1.
It's as wide as the room.
Well, no. Well, if I made it as wide as the room, then I couldn't have my wonderful speakers in front of it. So an audio trumps video. So as long as I'm having such a wonderful time listening to music, which I do, 24/7, and the video is for entertainment. But so it doesn't. If I spent $1 million, I could get a screen that rolled up or something. But this is fine. But it rewards sitting close to it, which is actually very nice.
The roll-up screen just went on sale. I think it's 5,000.
Well, the idea is that you can really sit close. It actually rewards sitting close to it because you don't see artifacts when you sit a few feet from it. It actually looks like you're outdoors, or you're looking at a scene. It's beautiful. It's just
Sounds like the diagonal must be what, about 15 feet,
more than that,
Yeah, more than that. Yeah.
20 feet.
maybe something like that. But I can't remember. I keep writing it down, but then I don't remember what it is. It's just embarrassingly big. That's all. But it's real. And I would love to have. I have the last Monday of the month music salon is back in business. So anybody who's been vaccinated or wants to wear masks or something is welcome to come. The last Monday of the month, we watch stuff and listen to stuff. And this salon has been going on for like 40 years. We took a year off for COVID, but now we're back, assuming people are vaccinated. So if anybody wants to just join us, Ken will tell you where to go.
And how to get there.
Huh?
Do we have to stand on the treadmill to watch?
No, but in fact, it's very nice to stand on the treadmill. I mean, I'm the only one of my friends who isn't on heart medicine.
Yeah, but the trick is when we get to your place, Richard, we'll have to have one for each person so it'll create enough power to run the projector.
That's a nice idea. No, it's 220 volts. So
Wow.
yeah, so you can't really touch it without being very serious. I had to put in a power line, a separate power line just for it.
Wait a
hope
minute.
so.
This is designed for US audience and it needs a dryer circuit.
Needs a what?
A
Dryer
circuit used for
circuit.
clothes dryer.
A closed dryer circuit. Yes, it does. Well, this is a theater piece. This is a professional. Apparently, I don't know. I just work here, but it's a professional theater piece, whatever that means.
Does it dry clothes?
Only if you put them over the cooling fans.
No, if I put it over the back, it would drive things out very quickly. I'm just worried about the air conditioning. It hasn't met the air conditioner yet. Let's see how they get along when it gets hot out. I don't know.
Man, this is asking for a house fire.
Thank you.
I could offer a humble
I
opinion.
nobody heard that. All you molecules, that was a lie. I do not ask for a house fire.
Richard, pay attention. If I could offer a humble opinion, I've got a same size of screen, maybe even slightly larger, but I paid $1,800 for my Epson projector, and it's flawless.
I know. Yes, I understand.
What Epson projector did you get?
The 4010. 4010.
You're gonna throw away all that money for nothing. How can I be so misguided? Well, don't bring it over because I don't want to see how good it is. Okay.
Okay, well, it has 2,400 lumens instead of 10,000, but that's enough for government work.
Exactly.
You don't have to wear your shades to watch it.
The question is, and how the color saturation is very important. I think there are two lasers. One of them just does red.
Okay.
And you've never seen blood like that, you know. Unless you were a surgeon, in which case you would have. But you know, it's really it's lots of fun. It's lots of fun. It's much better than life usually is. Especially when, you know, I said pot is legal, you know, so it's a lot of things that we can enjoy that we couldn't enjoy in public before.
Okay, so it's 7:28, and we've kind of gone over our normal time for the our experimental time for the open session, open forum. So I think it's time to transition to our main speaker. John Atkinson is a man who needs no introduction, mostly because his bio was included in your meeting announcement. And I'm sure you all read it. The things that mattered to me were he has a scientific education and is also a teacher. And I think that factors into why he can explain things pretty well. And he has a lot of experience with writing. He writes very well. I'm interested by what he writes.
Thank you.
I'm mostly interested by his test reports. They are rare and they are fairly useful and even more useful in a comparative sense. So I'm excited to hear from John. Take it away.
Okay. Okay. So can you all hear me, I assume?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
I'm gonna give a slideshow for about 10-15 minutes. So if I click on the share screen button, that's how it works, right?
We'll let you know in a moment.
Yes.
Okay. So Alvin in his original email said, you know, talk about your life as a magazine editor, products you've reviewed, your favorites. And I thought I'd just give a talk about 10 minutes about who I am and why I'm here. So this is me at age 12. You can see I had audiophile ears already, setting me up for my career.
So everybody should mute their microphones.
Well, I'm not going to. Okay. This is me, and I was 16 years old. I played violin in school orchestras. I sang in choirs. And in '64, I joined a band playing bass guitar. And bass guitar is relevant to what happened in my life. This was my first system. I was an audiophile. I had Wharfdale Super Linton speakers, Kenwood integrated amp, Garrett SP25 turntable with Audio-Technica cartridge. I upgraded to a Thorens TD150AB in 1972, Sony integrated amplifier, COS Pro 4A, Pro 4 AA headphones, which broke a lot, and my first cassette deck. And Bachelor of Science degree I got, interned in a government lab working on LEDs, worked full-time in another government lab, working originally on a waste reclamation project. And then that got canceled with, no one thought recycling waste would be a big thing back in the end of the 60s. And I ended up working in mining chemistry, which was bucket and spade chemistry. Things like being given a ton of ore and told to assay it and work out the best way to get the mineral out of it, whether it's copper or lead or whatever. So this is 1972. I've been playing in bands all through university and through my job in the lab. And in July 72, I got an offer to join a band, a trio that was put together to back a singer-songwriter. He'd got a contract with Warner Brothers. We were going to record an album at Abbey Road. We were going to tour the United States. And so gave up my job in the lab. My career was going to be as a successful pop musician. This is a two pictures I took at Abbey Road. You can see on the right there, our tape op was a very young Alan Parsons. And we made the album. The manager here on the left did a runner with the advance from Warner Brothers. Abbey Road didn't get paid. The album wasn't released. The American tour was canceled. And 3 months after I gave up my career in the lab, I was unemployed. I thought, well, okay. I got gigs at cabaret clubs, dance halls, whatever I could do. And at the same time, I did a postgraduate course in high school science teaching, trying to hedge my bets. And late 1973, the three of us who made the album at Abbey Road, we were hired to be Helen Shapiro's backing band. She was a teen sensation in the 1960s. And we toured England, Europe with Helen, late 73 till the spring of 75. And I'm showing this slide because this led to the next step in my career. You may not notice, but we're miming, except for Helen. She was singing live, but the rest of us were miming. And we recorded the backing tracks at a studio called Sawmills in Cornwall. And that was owned by a man called Tony Cox. And he said to the three of us, come and record an album at my studios, and you could be the resident musicians at the studios, and I can get you signed with DJM, the label that released Elton John's albums. So we made the album under the name Obie Clayton, who was the pen name of the singer-songwriter, Michael Cox, and it died. And, we had all our hopes pinned on it. I played Les bass guitar, I played violins, I played clarinets, and I sang backing vocals, but we got great critical reception and no sales. So in the summer of 1976, my then wife said, "You're an audiophile," or music lover, we weren't called audiophiles back then. "You read Hi-Fi News magazine. Here's an advert. They're looking for an editorial assistant." So I applied, got the job, and in September 76, joined Hi-Fi News. I used to do music interviews, news features, and basically for the next 6 years, I kept my ears open and my mouth shut, and I learned about magazine publishing, and it all came together. It was about music. I was a musician. It was about audio engineering. I had learned audio engineering at both my senior years at grammar school and at university. And it was about teaching. It was about conveying information that makes people think they're having a good time. At the same time, they're learning things. So upgraded my system. This is what I had in 78. My first pair of LS358s, which I still have, a Lynn Sondak, Lexan amplifier and preamplifier designed by Bob Stewart, later with Meridian. And then, as I said, I kept my ears open and my mouth shut. And I became the editor of Hi-Fi News, replacing my mentor, John Crabb, in October 1982. So I thought I'd give you a quick lesson in how to be a successful magazine editor. This was from Henry Luce. All great editors are men able to see how stories, episodes, and personalities flow and merge into one another to reproduce the pattern of the world, but only their own inner eye perceives. Of course, you have to be passionate about the subject. Lesson 2. To be an influence in society, one can be a little different, but only a little above one's neighbors, but not too much, said C.P. Snow in his 1951 novel, The Masters. Okay, Walter Lippmann, 1922. A newspaper can flout an advertiser, but if it alienates the buying public, it loses the one indispensable asset of existence. Right, I'm gonna flout advertisers because, as my next thing says, John Crabb, my predecessor at Hi-Fi News, my mentor says, if you tell the truth about components you review, there'll always be a small percentage of companies who at any one time who are not advertising your pages. But if you publish the truth, you'll have a good magazine. And if you have a good magazine, you'll have readers. And as long as you have readers, disgruntled advertisers will eventually return. But if you don't tell the truth, you won't have a good magazine. And if you don't have a good magazine, you won't have readers. And if you don't have readers, you won't have advertisers. And you can see that with magazines. When they abandon their commitment to the readers, their lifetime is relatively short. And then the other thing I learned from John is that a magazine's soul is its letters column. If you publish a lively collection of letters, it will enjoy a lengthy life. But if its letters column is dull or non-existent, then no matter how much advertising it has or how many readers it could boast, it will be just a matter of time before it has the lid shut on it. And that, I mean, I said in a conference years ago, a publishing conference, the only reason to publish reviews and articles is to generate good readers' letters. So there you have 5 lessons which have explained my commitment as an editor and why I have had a long career as an editor. After joining Hi-Fi News, I continued recording. I wrote a two-piece article on stereo imaging for Hi-Fi News, which is now reprinted on the Stereophile website. Here am I at a Hi-Fi show showing how coincident cardioids at 90 degrees don't give a very wide stereo image because it's only 6 dB separation between the channels. And I continued recording. This was 1984. This is the biggest project I ever did. Peter Walker at Quad invited me to record his local symphony orchestra, fleshed out with some professionals and with a 200-strong choir recording Elgar's The Dream of Gerontius in Ely Cathedral. I can send everybody a link to download this recording if they're interested. So became the editor, and by 1986, I'd almost doubled Hi-Fi News' circulation by following those 5 lessons, by producing a magazine that I, as an audiophile, would want to read. I'd met Larry Archibald on the right there, who was the owner of Stereophile in 1983. He bought the magazine from Gordon Holt in the center in 1982. And I met them because I used to crash the Stereophile shows at CESs. Larry called me in November 85 and said, would you like to come and do for Stereophile what you've done for Hi-Fi News? And what Larry didn't know was that the Hi-Fi News had been recently purchased by a big publishing company. And all of a sudden, I ran into a brick wall with middle managers who knew more than I did about what I should be doing. So there was a lot of conflict between me and my new bosses. So I said to Larry, yes, let's talk about it at the 86 CES in Las Vegas. I had to put the phone down. I told Larry later, I started to pack my bag. So after the CES, we drove back to Santa Fe where Stereophile was based. And we basically planned the next 10 years of Stereophile, the strategic direction, everything. And in May 86, I crossed the Atlantic and was faced with this. From an office block in South London, I'm now working in an Adobe-styled hut in Santa Fe, New Mexico. But of course, once you get through the door, everything is the same. You're working in a word processor. When I was at Hi-Fi News, I ended up producing the entire magazine on a BBC microcomputer. I developed a tag text language so we could send floppy disks to the typesetter. When I got to Santa Fe, Larry had also developed a tag text language to send files to the typesetter. So once we got through the door of this little shack, everything was the same. Here's me and Gordon doing listening tests in 1988. Gordon was the most astute listener I've ever worked with. Although by that time his hearing cut off above 11K, he was so reliable a listener, so astute. It was a pleasure to work with him. And the fact that I had taken over from him as the magazine's editor, the magazine that he had founded, never really was a rift between us. Not until 2009 when he finally quit because he wanted Stereophile to only concentrate on surround music. And I was like, no, our audience likes stereo. I like stereo. That's what we want. Okay, here's just a snapshot of 92 once I'm settled in with some other publishers, Peter Moncrief of International Audio Review on the left, Harry Pearson of The Absolute Sound on the right, and my partner, Larry Archibald. What I went to say was my price crossing the Atlantic was that Larry would let me buy into Stereophile. So from 86 on through to 1988, when Larry and I sold the magazine, I was not just the editor, I was one of the owners, the two owners. We moved again in 2000. This was our first office in Manhattan, 110 Fifth Avenue. Above an Armani store, we were on the 5th floor. It looks quite salubrious. My office, the window faced a brick wall and a fire escape on the building next door. Okay. And one thing I wanted to say about my experience as a bass guitarist, the very first instrument I played a lot. Role of the bass guitar is not to be a star. It's not like a lead singer or a lead guitarist. As a bass guitarist, you are creating the foundation for the music. Similarly, as a magazine editor, you may write, I do write, but your main role is creating a foundation for all the people who write for the magazine, to create the environment where they get their best. And that's basically a key to my career. I mean, with Stereophile, as I said, I bought into it, crossed the Atlantic, bought into it in 1986. Circulation then was around 20,000. By 1998, when we sold Stereophile to Peterson Publishing, circulation was around 92,000. And that kind of growth was due to the 5 lessons I mentioned earlier, the commitment to the readers, creating a magazine where the content educated, entertained, and informed. One thing I did, Gordon had done measurements right from the start, but never in any serious way and only occasionally. So when I joined, as I said, kept my head down for a little bit. And then in 89, we bought an Audio Precision System 1, we bought a DR Labs Melissa system, and we started doing measurements, publishing measurements with all the reviews. In this cartoon, he said, boy, did that open a can of worms. And it's Richard Heiser. One of the worst kept secrets in audio engineering is what we hear does not always correlate with what we measure. I was only able to meet Richard Heiser once. Man was an immense talent, opened my ears and eyes to so much that was true in audio. The last time I heard him speak was at the 86 AES convention in Los Angeles, where he phoned in a presentation from his hospital. I didn't know he was ill, and of course he died soon after that. And measurements, this was one of the great, articles, great cover lines I wrote, January 94 issue, comparing a single-ended tube amp with a modern solid state amp. And if one of these amplifiers is right, the other must be wrong, which was like opening the whole can of worms about, well, if this measures so badly, do people like it because of the measurements or despite the measurements? And in 2011, I was honored by being invited by the Audio Engineering Society to give the Richard C. Heiser Memorial Lecture, where I discussed a lot of the discrepancies. I gave 4 case histories of things where what measured technically correct was not preferred, and what was preferred was not technically correct. I can provide a link at the end for everyone to download that lecture from the Stereophile site. So I love measuring loudspeakers. When we started the measurement paradigm for Stereophile, I did the loudspeakers, and other writers did amplifiers and digital. And as they left, I took over amplifiers and digital as well. But loudspeakers is where my heart is. And as I said, we bought a Melissa system from Doug Reif, still use it. And it's based on this principle that you put the microphone there in a room, there are reflections from the boundaries, and if you can gate the impulse response there before the reflections, you've basically achieved the anechoic output of the loudspeaker. Of course, it's limited by the length of the window. And of course, you know, if you do an FFT on that impulse response, basically the data points in the FFT are going to be the inverse of that time, which when I do measurements, it's around 4 milliseconds. So I have a data point at 250 milliseconds, at 250 hertz, 500 hertz, 750 hertz, and so on. Doesn't matter at all in the treble where you have enough resolution, but in the mid-range, it's not good enough. And here's a typical measurement of a loudspeaker I've done in my room. So I way early on, using Melissa, I thought, right, I can use gated impulse response to produce the response from around 300 hertz upwards. Below that, I'll use near-field measurements as pioneered by Don Keel. And I spliced the two together with what Floyd Toole once said as an AES convention on measuring loudspeakers was a good deal of hand waving. But I've been doing this now for, oh gosh, 32 years, standardized procedures, same microphone, which I had calibrated at the NRC in Ottawa. And next slide is the same loudspeaker measured at the NRC in Canada for another magazine. And you can see here in the mid-range, because of a sparsity of data points, it's quite a smooth curve. And in the NRC measurement, there's a lot more detail and ripples. But other than the fact that theirs is what they call a listening window measurement, which is an average of, on axis, 15 degrees either side and 15 degrees above and below. And my measurement, which is averaged across a 30 degree window centered on the tweeter axis, it's the same speaker. So, you know, given the fact that this is only blended up to 20 kilohertz, the vertical scale is different. But I've been doing this. I can get repeatable results. If I measure this speaker today, if I measure it in 10 years' time, I'll get exactly the same response. I've kept up my recording career while editing the magazine. I've worked most recently the last 5 years with the Portland State Chamber Choir. I've had 4 albums recorded with them. The most recent I recorded at this wonderful church in Mount Angel, Oregon. You can see here is I've ended up, I always use the same mic technique. I use a central pair of ORTF cardioids, a spaced pair of high voltage DPA omnis either side, and a distant pair of DPA omnis, because in the mixing, you might want it more reverberant than you thought at the time. I also had mics set up at the back here for an offstage viola. This composer we were recording the work of, Eric Sessenvalds from Latvia, he wanted the effect of the choir receding into the distance on one track, on the fade out. So what we did was just basically, you know, gradually increase the contribution from the distant omnis and reduce the contribution from the near mics, and it all sounds like the choir is just gently moving away as the music fades. This album was released on Naxos last year, and it was actually named as one of Gramophone magazine's critics' choices for 2020. Of course, sales weren't good because of the pandemic, but it was a great thing to be involved in. Alvin asked about products I really like. For some years, I bought a pair of Kef LS50s after reviewing them. These are the best mini monitors I know of. Other than their limitations of loudness and deep bass, they create a sonic picture, a stereo image, which is totally true to life. Audeze LCDX headphones. Again, I bought the review samples, and these are the best headphones I use. I use this Air SACD player as my primary digital source. I've had it now for, gosh, 12 years. It's still the best. And I use, and with it, a PS Audio DAC, which I like very much. It's not the most resolving D2A processor, but it always lets the music through. Still play the bass in the 21st century, except last gig I did was 5 years ago, and now I just play in my living room. So that was my career as an editor, a musician, a teacher, a scientist, and an editor and an audio journalist. So there we go. So that was my life in audio, Alvin.
It's not over. You're still alive and still publishing.
Yeah. Oh, and you asked about what I'm doing now. My Stereophile changed hands several times since '98. It was bought in 1999 by EMAP USA, who sold it to Prime Media in 2004, who sold it to Source Interlink in 2007, and who was sold to AV-Tech, coincidentally the publishers of Hi-Fi News, my old home, in 2018. And I told when they bought us in 2018, we discussed the future, and I said, look, I'm over 70 years old. You know, I've been working for the last 3 years. I've been working 7-day weeks, 12-hour days. I need to retire. So we did a deal that I would retire at the end of March 2019. I would remain doing as technical editor. I would do all the measurements. I would write a review for every issue. And one of the things I like doing is I prepare all the magazine's content for the website, because that's one management training course I went on said, always try to keep to yourself something which doesn't require a lot of thought, but makes you feel fulfilled. So I still do that. I handed over to Jim Austin, who was the past editor of Science magazine. He had resigned from that magazine when his wife took on a professorship at Columbia in New York. He moved from Maine to New York. He was unemployed and available, and he'd been writing for Stereophile for 10 years. So he took over from me on April the 1st, 2019, and he's doing a good job. Anyway, that's me. Now, I'd love to answer some questions.
Well, I don't want to be first. So anyone else want to go first?
I'll volunteer, Alvin.
Okay.
John, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation.
You're welcome.
You've had a fantastic career. I'm envious.
Well, not without pain. I mean,
well, that's how you grow sometimes.
Yeah.
But I'm curious since you've had such a strong background in the audio field, where do you think it's going? In other words, I think a lot of us, obviously looking at the various people on Zoom, we're a bunch of graybeards at this point. Do you see the business expanding into youthful markets, or how do you see it going?
I would love to see it expanding into youth markets. I don't think it's happening right now. I mean, I have 3 children. None of them have audio systems. All listen to music and all enjoy music, but it's on their phones. And, you know, and I mean, back in 2007, we started Inner Fidelity website because we felt that headphone listening would become very important, particularly to a younger audience. It did, but not to the extent that we found commercially acceptable or commercially rewarding enough. So we folded Inner Fidelity into the Stereophile website and archived most of the content on Stereophile. I don't know. I mean, what I do see in the audio industry is this shift upwards in price, that you see companies. If the safest business strategy is for them to make a small number of very expensive products of which they can be sure of selling all of them, rather than a large number of inexpensive products of which they can only sell 75%. That way lies bankruptcy. The other way lies continued existence. So now you see $100,000 amplifiers, $250,000 loudspeakers, $100,000 digital playback systems, and the sales of these products are very small, but it's the only way those companies can, the only safe way for those companies to proceed business-wise.
Have you been able to convince your children that audio quality is not MP3 compressed?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I'd like to think so. I mean, my youngest daughter's main reaction with me is to come down. My listening room is in the basement. When we bought this house in Brooklyn, we turned the basement used to be a dentist's office, and we reintegrated it with the house. And I knocked rooms together to make a listening room. So when I'm really rocking out, my main interaction with my daughter is she comes downstairs and says, "Stop playing that music so loud." Even though it's extremely high quality music, she's annoyed by the leakage into the rest of the house.
I want to say something about how we grew up before television. I don't know about you, but I learned about baseball on the radio.
Uh-huh.
I learned about classical music as the interstitial music between scenes on radio dramas like The Lone Ranger. So that was a complete education in the use of music as emotional texture, and it just gravitated from there into everything else. And not only is there nothing like that now, but there's no live. That the sound they listen to is completely concocted on a control room. It's not acoustic.
Right. I mean, I was privileged to have grown up in England and been educated in the 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm. But when I was at the equivalent of high school, we had music appreciation lessons where once a week we would spend an hour listening to classical music on a system which was a leak sandwich speaker, a leak tube amp, and we would be exposed to Holst the Planets, Sibelius's Finlandia, Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony, and almost without trying, we were being exposed to great music and learn to love it. I don't know if that happens in schools anymore.
Nowhere.
Yeah, there was an interesting show on PBS I think it was last night or the night before, a great performances show of Beethoven in Beijing. And it was about the Philadelphia Orchestra and Ormandy's efforts at starting a rapprochement, if you will, with the Chinese country by bringing the Philadelphia Orchestra to live concerts of heretofore prohibited Western music. And it had like an effect apparently of like dropping a stone into a large pool of still water. The waves just spread out. And one of the things that the Chinese have been doing even currently is every kid in every school gets exposed to music. And either they make it, they listen to it, or they get involved in singing or whatever. And they have very active music educator programs throughout their entire school systems now, pretty much in China. And one of the things that they despaired about talking to some of the people like Seguin, who is now the conductor of the Philadelphia Orchestra, is that all of that has been cut away from American public schools. Hardly any public schools in the United States anymore have an active music program through all the grades, starting with first grade and working right up through high school.
Yeah,
and it's
I mean,
one of the things
which I realized, I mean, I was never any good at sports, but playing in the school orchestra exposed me to what you benefited from working with a team, working with other people. And these days, I think if you're not good at sports, what happens to those children? They're not involved in anything.
They do video games.
Yeah, that's true.
And they learn teamwork, and they learn how to hate and how to compete and how to survive humiliation. So, very boring as far as I'm concerned, but but there are a lot of people who find that very, very enchanting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But no acoustic music. They don't. The whole idea of an acoustic space. I wanted to ask you, John, about why you didn't like ambient music, why you preferred stereo ambient.
Sorry, I missed that question. Why I did what?
You said you resisted the attempt to have the magazine write about ambient music?
Oh, about surround sound. Well, it was the fact that, as I said with that C.P. Snow quote, you can lead people, but only by a little if you don't want them to just turn around and ignore you. So when Gordon wanted to devote the entire magazine to surround sound, that was the wrong thing to do because the audience wasn't ready. After Gordon resigned, went to work for the Absolute Sound very briefly, and Kalman Rubinson proposed to me that the one way in to that subject would be for him to start writing a column, Music in the Round, which he did for 100 episodes. But surround sound for music lovers never really caught on in the way that both Gordon and Cal felt it should. And I think it was the fact that people of our generation, or even the slightly younger generation, associate listening to music with the stereo experience primarily. People who are like surround sound primarily are experiencing it via home theater. And the gap between those two is crossed occasionally, but not in any major way. That's all I can say. I mean, we
haven't movie theaters had rear speakers and sometimes side speakers to fill in the sound, especially with the 70 millimeter multi-track release?
Virtually all movies are presented in surround sound in theaters now. It's one of the things they have to offer.
Yeah. But it doesn't seem to, I mean, when you listen to, I was listening to Mahler Third this afternoon, and I only have stereo. And yes, I guess if I had a good surround recording, which it might give me another 5%, but
may I when you add an opinion, I know I tend to beat the ambient music horse a lot. But I particularly find it's wonderful to take an acoustic mono signal or any kind of a mono signal up before stereo and put it into I have around 23 channels of surround that derive from either 2 channels or 1 channel. And I swear to God, I would rather listen to Caruso unfolded, have the acoustic unfolded into the room than listen to a multi-channel, multi-mic channel pop singer today. It's a natural sound, and if you have the ambient recovery system tuned and you learn how to listen to it in your room, it's breathtaking how much ambience is on those Toscanini recordings, Burt Vangler recordings. They're wonderful. And the good thing about being old is I don't miss the high frequencies because I don't hear them anyway. But the ambience is fantastic. If you're ever in town, I'll be happy to show you.
Well, I've had my vaccinations now. Maybe I should travel up to Boston.
Be great. No, because it's really, Toscanini is fantastic. It's so much better than anybody else. It's fantastic. And Burt Vangler, when he's hot, is completely brilliant. But you can't listen to it in like single channel mono if you can hear all the ambience that's in the recording just unfolded with a little algorithm. It's wonderful.
John, I'm impressed by your background and your devotion to the consumer. Now, the Boston Audio Society that's in our Constitution, consumer total responsibility, and that's our audience. And you, being in publishing, you have to please manufacturers. How do you handle the space?
Well, do I have to please manufacturers? I mean, yes, they send us the products to review and we review them, and they have to live with the consequences. It creates friction within the company. The 5 lessons I gave you on how to be an editor. The corollary to all those is you can only get away with that as long as your financial numbers are good.
Correct.
Because when you work for big companies, there's always middle managers who feel they know better than you. I think I said that's why I was getting unhappy at Hi-Fi News. And the middle managers will say, well, I mean, I remember one awful instance back in, God, was it 2008, where we had a new middle manager come in and he says, right, you're covering all these products, these companies' products, and you're not charging them for it. I said, well, no, they get the benefit if it's a good review, and if it's not a good review, they live with the consequences. He said, well, I've got this great idea. You start charging the manufacturers to review their products. And I said, no, that doesn't work. No, listen to me. He said, we'll start off, you can charge them by covering their rooms at shows, and then we'll get into those charging them for reviews later. And I went away from that meeting thinking, what the heck am I going to do about this? Because this is just wrong. And what I found with middle managers in large companies is you can ignore them if your numbers remain healthy, your financial numbers remain healthy. And because middle manager lifetime in a big company is relatively short, he'll either be promoted out of the way, or he'll go and join another company, or he'll be fired. So what happens is you ignore them when they're telling you to do things which conflict with what you want to do as the editor to keep the magazine successful. Because by the time they would have found out that you've ignored them and disobeyed them, they're gone. They've been replaced by somebody else, and now you have a honeymoon period where he's looking at your numbers. Oh, this is all very good. You must know what you're doing. And then when they come up with the bright ideas to increase short-term revenue, they're gone too. By the time they realize they would have realized you've disobeyed them. So all through the 5 transfers of ownership of Stereophile after Larry Archibald and I sold it in '98, I've worked that strategy as far as I can, with the big difference that now we're owned by AV Tech, who also owned Hi-Fi News. They come from the same background that I do, so we don't have those conflicts anymore. And yes, if a product gets a somewhat negative review, we reviewed a speaker a few issues back where the manufacturer canceled all their advertising as a result. But that's their problem, I think, because now, they're no longer getting the exposure in Stereophile's pages, and one day they'll come back.
John, I have a question about perceptions among, audiophiles. For years, I've gone back and forth between measurements, listening, and one day I might feel, it's all about measurements, and the next day I feel, no, that's not good, it's all about listening. And I found out that, my philosophy, which is not shared by a lot of people, is that you have to start with measurements. Otherwise, you can get yourself in a position of what I call wandering in the desert.
Yeah.
Because if you make a change in one area and you just do it without measurements, it's going to affect your perception in another area. My question is, I find so many people that, I don't find a lot of people, but I find some people that believe it's all about measurements, nothing else matters. But I find a lot more people that say it's only about listening, measurements don't have any relationship. How do you deal with that?
Well, take loudspeakers. You can't just put on a recording and make a value judgment. You have to get back to basics. One of the things I put on the Stereophile test CDs is dual mono pink noise. And, you get ridiculed for that because, it's not music, how can you tell everything? And think, listen to the pink noise. Is it a narrow image, centrally placed? If it isn't, there's something wrong. If it is narrow center image, but at some frequencies it splashes to the sides, you've got a problem with the loudspeaker, or perhaps with the listening room. It's getting reflections which are interfering with the stereo. So before you even listen to a music recording, dual mono pink noise will tell you a lot about what your speakers are doing in that room. So now you have to go back and optimize room acoustics or the speaker, work out what is going wrong. Maybe your speakers are out of phase. I've seen that happening at shows, where you walk into a room and, oh my goodness, there's something wrong. And then sheepishly, the manufacturer admits, oh my goodness, yes, it's out of phase. So before you play music, get down to basics. one of the things Gordon Holt used to instruct, and which I've written about as well, is where do you put the speakers in the room? Well, get your friend to stand or sit where the speakers are and talk. And as you sit in the listening chair, just have him talk as he moves around the room, and where he sounds most natural, that's a good starting point for the speakers. Again, it's not music, it's not a recording, but it's first principles, getting things, the basics right. Then you have the thing of the problem of okay, I've got all this, I've set it all up. What am I going to do? I'm going to put on my Furtwängler recording, or my Toscanini, or in my case, a Klemperer. Okay, I'm listening to it. What can I say about the sound? And the answer is not a lot, because what you're hearing is dependent now on the system, but also on recording, what Floyd Toole called the circular confusion, that you don't know what is the difference between the system and what's on the recording. So what I used to tell my reviewers, now Jim's reviewers, is play lots of different recordings and listen to the things which are consistent. If there's too much bass on this recording of Elgar's Third Symphony, is there now too much bass when you put on Patricia Barber's Higher? Different recording, different music, different everything. But if there's still this consistency of one aspect, that's probably going to be the system, not the recording. You have to break that circle of confusion. Now, when I make my own recordings, of course, I have an absolute reference because I've done the mix. And so, like I said in that choral recording, I'm using a central pair of ORTF cardioids, spaced omnis to the sides. And what I do before I make every recording or every set of takes, I get a slapstick in the center, like clap. Now I have the time reference in all the mic channels. I then get the choir to just tell me their names as they go from left to right. So when I'm doing the mix, first of all, I time align the mics channels. So now everything, those slapsticks all coincide. And then I listen to how big each image of each singer is. And what I find is that I can get away with the singers at the edge of the soundstage, which are primarily being picked up by one of the spaced omnis, a little bit bigger compared to the imaging in the center, where it's much more precise. I can get away with that. And if I hear that on a pair of speakers I'm reviewing, I think, these speakers are doing a good job. On that whole subject of recording, I used to be a total Blumlein purist. Figure of eight, cross figure of eights. It's the only way to make recordings. And I tried that in the late 70s, early 80s, found that it was impossible to find the right place in the hall where you could get the right sense of the imaging, the reverb, the balance between the direct and the reverb. But also, I remember going to an AES presentation by the late Michael Gerson in 1981, I think it was, when he pointed out that Blumlein's substitution of amplitude for time information, which is what gives you stereo imaging below 1 kilohertz, doesn't work. I mean, it works, but what you lose is the sense of bloom at low frequencies, because your ear is used to hearing time information, time difference between the ears, and Blumlein making amplitude stereo substituting amplitude difference information. So I started experimenting with spaced omnis. But two spaced omnis on their own do not give you a good stereo image. It's like two recordings of the music, different recordings happening at the same time. But if you could then mix in your ORTF cardioids or an MS pair, always going to be a bit deficient in low frequencies. Omnis, of course, have good low frequencies. And you could get this balance between the amplitude stereo at high frequencies and the sort of time information stereo at low frequencies. You could get you get the best of both worlds. Yes. You had a question, Tom.
Yeah, well, the question, and then you partially covered it in how you do your recordings, but I guess my question is, with all the years you've been in the magazine, have you been successful in convincing people of the relationship of measurements to listening? I don't seem to have. very good
No,
luck
I mean,
with it.
well, first of all, it's as I said in that comparison between the Carry amplifier and McCrell amplifier and the January '94 cover, the Carry measures terribly. It's a single-ended tube. It has a bent transfer function, and the higher the signal, the more second harmonic you get. And when people say it's a lovely sounding amplifier, well, is that because they like the added second harmonic? Long as there's not too much intermodulation, then maybe they're saying what they like with recordings is they like that extra fattening of the sound you get from too much second harmonic distortion, compensating for what they feel are the deficiencies in their recordings. I mean, with digital, I mean, one of the things I talked about in my Heiser lecture was, why do people like non-oversampling digital converters that don't have reconstruction filters? Because there you get that sawtooth waveform, and you get all the alias content dumped back down in the audio band. Is that what they like? Or is it the fact that on a NOS DAC with no reconstruction filter, you get superb type impulse response? Is it that? Are they liking the impulse response, or are they liking the aliasing? You don't know. With speakers, I mean, you listen to a good sealed box speaker, and it has that tightness at the low frequencies. And you also get with a sealed box, you get, a good room gain because it's only rolling off at 12 dB per octave. Whereas with a reflex, it's rolling off at 24 dB per octave, rolls off quicker in the room. But on the other hand, the bass goes on for longer. People tend to like underdamped reflex speakers because they're getting this impression of bass, but it's not real. It's not accurate, but they like it. So I mean, and this is going on. We still don't know. Floyd Toole did all those things at Harman, the listening tests, where they showed what people preferred was flat response, well-controlled dispersion, the power response, which rolled off gently towards the highs. And people still make loudspeakers which aren't like that. Like the speaker I showed you was from a manufacturer which has superb technical resources, has anechoic chamber, has superbly skilled engineers. But if you remember that response, it isn't flat. It has a suck out in the low treble, and it has 3 to 5 dB too much energy in the top octaves. They could make a loudspeaker which conforms to Toole's preference findings, but they choose not to. Why not? Why is that? Is that because it's the kind of speaker which stands out in the dealer's showroom? Or is it that they think that, if a little bit of treble's good, too much treble must be better? I don't know.
I hate to say this, I really do, but I am happy to see that your level of frustration is similar to my level of frustration.
Yeah, and I'm happy to know, John, that you're in the loudspeaker measurements more than others, because I want to present a new AES standard for measuring the loudness or the quality playback level of loudspeakers. And to do that, I'll show the anyway, I'll get it started. I got to share my screen. So here we go.
I have a question, if that can be, if I can butt in.
Go ahead, but I want to get started on this. So you want to wait?
Yeah. Pardon?
Okay.
All right. I'm Charlie Repka. I don't know how many of you know me from my letters in the journal. I have a background very similar to our guest. I have an engineering degree. I'm an active musician, and I did many years testing of audio equipment for both NBC and ABC, and I'm a recording engineer. I worked for a number of years for Vanguard Records, among others, and I would like your comments on the current emphasis on 24-bit and absolutely dizzying sample rates which I find pretty much to my ears mostly a waste of time because of the limitations of microphones, limitations of the recording space, and limitations of our hearing. And I would just like your general comments.
Well, I certainly believe when you make a recording, you should be recording with 24-bit depth. And I mean, the recordings I make, I've done some jazz recordings, I've done some rock recordings. Almost all my recordings are of small classical groups or choirs. And I've found that what I like to do, I go to the venue the day before and I talk to the staff in the venue. And I stand there in the auditorium and I listen. And after a while, you think, oh, there's some 120 hertz. So you talk to the building manager. He says, oh yes, that's the power supply for the emergency lighting. Can we turn it off? Well, not while there's people there. Okay, so you know, we're going to do the session in the evening, so can we arrange to turn that off? Okay, listen again, 120 hertz is gone. What's that noise? Well, that's the air conditioning in the building next door. Can we turn that off? Again, once the workday is over, yes, we'll turn that off. And you go through this iterative process of listening to the space to get the noise as low as possible. And when you do, 16 bits is not enough. The noise floor is in that room is going to need more than 16 bits to capture. For high sample rates, I do all my recording at 88.2 or 96K. The hardware I have doesn't run up higher sample rates, but no one has complained. For the CD releases, I spend a lot of time experimenting with noise shaping and with redivering to get the CD version, which as close as possible to the sound quality of the original high-res master. And then, you know, I release the high-res masters, but the CD version that's probably where most of the revenue comes from. But certainly 24 bits, you must record in 24 bits, and the higher sample rate is beneficial, I feel.
I would have to disagree to some, but mostly based on a number of AES papers that were published or were presented by Lou Fielder, who used to work for Dolby Labs.
For Dolby. Well, his original paper on dynamic range was
and dynamic range, and I'm looking at one that's here now from 1992, noise criteria for recording facilities. And they went to Skywalker Ranch and they did a number of tests with the room empty, the room full of musicians just sitting there, the AC on, the AC off, you know, and Skywalker Ranch there was no money, there were no budget limitations.
I know, I visited it many years ago.
Yeah, and basically his end result was 16 bits is more than enough, except for a narrow band between 2 and 4 kilohertz.
Oh yeah.
Where it was noisier than by about 2 to 3 dB. And I'm saying to myself, how many people are going to hear the 2 to 3 dB more noise, and I mean, and these are under optimum conditions.
Yeah.
Also with one microphone. Every time you double the number of channels, you increase the noise by 3 dB, just from non-correlated, assuming non-correlated noise. So if you have more than one microphone, so you go to 2 mics, you've lost 3 dB. You go to 4 mics, you've lost 6 dB.
If you've got a correlated signal, then that
it's 6 dB.
By 6 dB, and the noise by only by 3 dB. So you've increased the signal to noise ratio by 3 dB.
Yes, and
when I do my Melissa waterfall plots for the magazine, I average 128 measurements to drop the noise floor as much as I can, just through that mechanism.
Yeah, and so for me, all these people who are now recording, because it's so easy on a computer, you could have literally hundreds of channels recording. And, well, and I worked in a studio doing multi-track, I did all kinds of music at Vanguard Records. And right now I just specialize in classical. And the more tracks you add, the more noise you get. And you're dealing with crazy producers who, well, they can't decide, do I like, I literally, somebody told me a story. Well, I don't like, do I like the sound of this mic on this instrument or that mic on an instrument? He says, well, we've got tracks, record both of them. I'll decide later. Or they'll combine them. I had a bass player that he was never happy with his sound, and we would have a microphone feed, a direct feed, all these multiple feeds combined in to try and get the bass sound that he wanted to hear, and it's just craziness, and so when people start complaining about, well, we need 24 bits and we need, 192 kilobit sample rate, I'm going, no, you don't, but if it makes you happy, Yeah,
but if you're going to do any mathematical operations on your data, start with 24.
Well, you have to wonder a little bit about the analog days, having a professional tape recorder, which generally, if it was a damn good Studer or Ampex machine, gave you maybe 65 to 68 dB signal to noise ratio. And you throw in another 15 dB for Dolby. If you had a Dolby A processor, which gets you up to about 75, 80 dB, and that's your dynamic range. And maybe a 3 dB of headroom before the tape started to crush the signal from just, overload capability. And for years and years and years, Richard was talking about this earlier, the Toscanini recordings, most of them were not on tape. They're on discs, transcription discs, a lot of them. And it's like, wait a minute, you get to the point where maybe it's overkill. I'm not sure. But for years and years and years, 65 to 70 dB was it. And we lived with it. And people still rave today about a lot of, God forbid, vinyl recordings that they wouldn't part with for all the tea in China.
Well, Charles said about, the experiments at Skywalker Sound showing that 16 bits was not enough in the presence region. And Bob Stewart pointed out many years ago to me that the RIAA curve actually means that a well-mastered LP has more dynamic range than a 16-bit PCM in that exact frequency region. Of course, it has much less resolution in the bass and the top octave, but that's where our hearing is not so discriminating anyway.
I think, if I could interrupt, there are two things that we're dealing with here. One is the quality of the original recording. And if the quality of original recording is not up to par, then you're lost. The second thing is, when you talk about noise levels and dynamic range, just look at the average room where you're listening to the music. And if you don't have some kind of control over the background noise in your room, the total ridiculous example, listen in your car driving down the road. And to some degree that applies also to your listening room. So if you have a very noisy listening room, it's no excuse for not having a good recording, but you're probably not going to be able to tell the difference between the exceptionally good recording and the average recording, because the noise and the room problems are just swamping them out. That's my opinion anyway.
Okay, I'd like to get started on the issue of loudspeaker testing at volume levels. And
Alvin, after you're done, I'd like to raise one more question about
okay.
Let's hear it.
Okay, here's a video presentation on the new proposed standard for AES. Can everyone see it?
Loudspeaker manufacturers and end users rely on specifications.
No, we just see your screen.
We just see your screen.
We can hear it.
Measurement of a loudspeaker.
Okay, let me try it again. Let's see what could have happened. Okay, I'll try it again. Let's see. Let's share. What happens?
You need to share the window that the video opens.
Yeah, can you see it now? See my screen now? No?
No, we just see the directory.
Oh, just the directory, okay.
System's performance.
Share.
It's critical to have an accurate measurement of a loudspeaker's capabilities, including maximum linear peak SPL at the design.
How about now?
Nope. No.
If you double click on the file name, maybe that'll open the video.
Nothing?
And end users.
Just the directory file.
This is the directory.
This happened to me once before, and what you need to do, I think somebody already mentioned it, you need to open another window and work in that window and then share that window.
Start the video, Alvin, and then share it.
Understandable because there's never been a
The
test
video
signal
is
that could
started.
objectively and accurately model the comparatively dynamic behavior of music.
So, okay, let's see.
Which contains all
We got
frequencies
going
and equal
here.
energy levels for each octave. Because pink noise's energy is consistent, the signal's crest factor,
Alvin, get a horse.
the average level,
I hear you.
is usually the same at all frequencies.
Start the,
While pink
Alvin,
noise does a
start
great
the
job of replicating
video
music's potential frequency
before
band,
you share anything.
sort of modeling its dynamic
Once the
capacity
window opens
and
up with the video, then share that window.
analyzing all kinds of loudspeaker manufacturers, consultants, and end users all rely on
Correct.
specifications to predict a sound
Oh, well.
system's performance.
Nice try.
I guess so.
Did you try not showing us the, don't start sharing until you've started the video.
What's that again?
Don't start the video first.
Okay.
Share the window with the video.
Okay, I'll try that. Okay, let's see what we got here. 500. Okay. Okay, here's the video promotion.
Loudspeaker manufacturers, consultants, and end users all rely on specifications to predict a sound system.
Okay, now I'll hit the share, see if that works this time.
A loudspeaker's capabilities, including maximum linear peak SPL at the design
How's
stage.
that?
But have you ever noticed that loudspeaker
There we go.
speakers are all over the map? This is understandable because there's never been a test
You
signal
see
that could
the
objectively
video?
and accurately
Yes.
model the comparatively dynamic
Working,
behavior
Alvin.
of music. A common test signal is pink noise, which contains all frequencies at loudspeaker manufacturers, consultants, and end users all rely on specifications to predict a sound system's performance. It's critical to have an accurate measurement of a loudspeaker's capabilities, including maximum linear peak SPL at the design stage. But have you ever noticed that loudspeaker specs are all over the map? This is understandable because there's never been a test signal that could objectively and accurately model the comparatively dynamic behavior of music. A common test signal is pink noise, which contains all frequencies at equal energy levels for each octave. But because pink noise's energy is consistent, the signal's crest factor, the difference between peak and average levels, is nearly the same at all frequencies. So, while pink noise does a great job of replicating music's potential frequency bandwidth, it falls short of modeling its dynamic complexity and unpredictability. We started analyzing all kinds of music, and pretty soon we noticed a trend. For each sample, the crest factor always rose with frequency. We identified this trend as the measurable difference between pink noise and music, and we concluded that we could represent the music trend with a test signal. Armed with this discovery, we got to work creating a test signal with a crest factor that rises with frequency, just like music. We call it M-noise. The days of guessing games are over. When you use the M-noise test signal and the M-noise test procedure to determine a loudspeaker's maximum output, you can trust that the loudspeaker will deliver the same results in the field when it reproduces music. Uncover your sound system's true potential with M-noise, the new gold standard in loudspeaker specification.
Okay, the next thing I want to show is the what the M noise looks like and sounds like. And here's the what the M noise sounds like. This is the new proposed standard for measuring how loud a loudspeaker will play before distortion sets in. The analysis of that is what's coming up next, and that's the what it looks like frequency analysis wise. Is that visible?
We're back to the file. Oh,
There you
hang
go.
on.
We got a blank screen now.
Yeah, Alvin, this is about the maximum output level for arena type speakers that have to play loud. And it is probably a good test to keep the speakers from overloading with the kind of musical signals they're dealing with. I'm not sure it has anything to do with home reproduction. Like, you know, maybe you need extra crest factor repeaters, and maybe people should be designing them that way.
Is that visible?
Yeah, we see the
chart here now.
The plot of the noise.
I would disagree, Brett. I would maintain that most home speakers don't play loud enough. One of my biggest criticism is when I go around different people's homes is the amount of distortion that's coming out of most home loudspeakers.
Well, this would be at high frequencies. So you're hearing distortion, harmonic distortion at 8 kilohertz.
What you hear more is the IM distortion. And the measurement for M noise measures coherence, which means all distortions.
I would like to interject that I think that M noise is a very good standard that they're proposing. However, it really pertains more to people who are designing loudspeakers. I don't think that for the speakers that I build, I would pick the absolute maximum loudness in my small room as the defining factor of how I design my speakers. But for people who are in the business of manufacturing all kinds of speakers, whether they're for sound reinforcement or a home, I think that is another tool in their quiver to find out how the speaker will perform in real life conditions.
Tom, I would argue is a perfect signal for people buying loudspeakers. It's a standard which people like John Atkinson could see to it so that we can compare speakers.
I don't disagree with that. I'm saying for the end user, I don't see the end user getting that test mechanism and performing the tests in their home.
Well, I'm not proposing that everybody do the test, no, but I'm proposing that it becomes a regular, for example, incorporated in some magazine like Stereophile, so that when you bought the loudspeaker, you can predict how loud it might play in your listening room before distortion.
I agree with that. And I also agree that the manufacturers would be well served if they incorporate it as part of their testing. And
that's my
can you hear me, Brad?
I can hear you.
So, Brad, actually, this was designed for not just stadiums, but in consumer rooms. So the sponsor of this M Noise is Meyer Sound Labs. They make small two-way speakers for consumers, and they specify the M Noise for it specifically.
So if their M noise compliant speakers are better than others, that should show up in reviews.
Yeah, I mean they have a figure there, and actually it was interesting because my guess is some of their competitors are about 7 or 10 dB lower in M.
But I mean, Meyer Sound is a pro audio company primarily.
Yeah, that's a pro. They've been a pro
primarily,
audio company
but they make
those arena speakers for a long time.
Yeah.
They make consumer two ways.
Yeah. A quick sidebar. Larry Archibald, my ex-partner at Stereophile, his daughter Rachel was Maya Sound's promotional manager for many, many years. Just 2 degrees of separation there.
Okay. Can I bring up a question? Go ahead. I'd like to bring up a question about power amp testing at some point. So whenever you guys are through with that, let me know.
Well, I just had a question for Ms. Atkinson about this M noise. So let's assume that it became a standard, which it appears that you could easily reproduce in your room.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I will explore. I need to find out how you can, by using a pseudo-random noise with a shaped spectrum, that will reveal distortion.
There actually is a detailed explanation of that on their website.
Okay, I'll check it out. Alvin did send me the link.
There's an analyzer piece of equipment.
I would like to go back to something Richard Goldwater said. He mentioned that playing a Caruso record with the proper ambience, really sounded good. I've done that. I've written a paper on my website called Caruso on Stage. Now, if you play a Caruso mono recording through a speaker, but you use concert hall impulse responses to drive surround speakers, you get the effect that Caruso in your room is singing on the top of Carnegie Hall. It's very effective, and it adds a great deal to sound reproduction.
Yeah, I've used some convolving reverberation engines on some of my recordings. It's interesting that you're in a dry studio and you think, I wonder what this would sound like in the concertgebouw. And there you have it. You can do it.
Yes, you can do that. And of course, it enhances 2-channel recordings by having surround speakers. I've got to say that your talk about 5.1 surround. 5.1 is for theaters. It's a joke. It's not psychoacoustically valid. It makes no sense at all. But using surround speakers properly, either with a 4-channel recording, which has concert hall reverberation in the rear channels, and it has directional capabilities and so on. If you need to know more about the psychoacoustics of hearing and directionality, all that's on my website, and you can do this. In a way, stereo was developed in 1931. It's had a long run, but there are new technologies and things that can be done. It's more for classical music than productions of pop music, which can be anything. But if you want a symphony orchestra in your living room, you can have it.
Okay.
I have to ask if there's been a correction for the horn resonances in those Caruso recordings.
I'm sorry, I missed that. What did you say?
I have to ask if there's been a correction for the horn resonances in the Caruso recordings before you start saying it sounds like he's in the room.
Yeah. Well, let me say yes, of course. But we never heard Caruso live, so we don't know exactly all the harmonics of his voice. It's not perfect. Caruso's not going to sound like Pavarotti in a modern recording. But if you place him in a concert hall acoustic, a lot of these imperfections of the old recordings become inaudible. There's a very good example of this in a Marian Anderson recording, made in 1935. It has severe clipping on high notes, but if you play it ambiophonically, that is with full surround recording, you can't hear that distortion. Very hard. You have to know it's there to hear it. So the way the ear works, it's amazing the things the ear will forget when you're in a realistic acoustic, like a concert hall. With full directionality, the reverberation from the hall has to come to you with its ILD, ITD, and pinna directional responses intact, so that the brain thinks it's in a real space. It then forgives a lot of things. In a concert hall, if somebody coughs in left field, you hardly hear it. But in a stereo recording, if there's a cough from a live recording, you hear it right away. That's an example of how this works. However, I don't want to take, I could give an election.
All right, I have an issue that has to do with the history of the BAS and our guests that I'd like to bring up. There were arguments over the years about the nature of controlled testing and its place in evaluating equipment. And part of that was an argument over power amp sound and how audible the sound of different power amps was. I published an article in 1991 in Stereo Review about a double-blind test that I did with 2 power amps and a particular loudspeaker, where the difference was completely obvious. And the reason it was completely obvious was because one was an NAD solid-state power amp that had a fairly flat power response into this set of infinity towers, and the other was an Audio Research tube amp, which had a high output impedance and whose frequency response into the system resembled an attenuated version of its impedance curve. So it had probably about 1.5 dB to 2 dB dip, about 3 octaves wide in the upper mid-range. It was probably true that Arnie Nudell voiced the speakers using an Audio Research power amp, probably that particular power amp, because it sounded so obviously right with those speakers. But what you could easily see if you measured the response of the power amp connected to the speakers was that the tube power amp straightened out the response of the speakers to make them sound like Arnie wanted them to sound. And if you put a solid state amp on them, it yanked the upper mid-range up and sounded hard and irritating and unmusical. And you could tell this with a double-blind test without even listening to A or B. With choral music or pink noise, you could just switch to a trial number and you'd know right away which amp was playing. So it seemed to me when that article was published that we had decisively settled the question of power amp audibility, at least in this particular case, in Stereophile's favor. And I always wondered why nobody in the subjective audio magazines ever took note of this. It would have meant that you would have had to measure louds when you're testing power amps. You would have had to measure them connected to the loudspeakers you were using, and that's kind of a pain, but it would have been very interesting to do.
Well, with every amplifier Stereophile reviews, I do examine what the interaction between its output impedance across the band and a standard simulated loudspeaker. And you can see, for example, with a tube integrated amp that was reviewed, I think in the April issue, there's like plus and minus 3 dB variations across the response, across the frequency band, audio band. That's audible. Yes, of course it is, Brad. But, you know, I was arguing with the reviewer about this, and they said, well, you know, the manufacturer is insistent that he has this very high output impedance because that is to what sounds best to him on the speakers with which he used to design the amplifier. Well, as you pointed out, that's probably true. But it means that the only customers who buy that amplifier and get the sound that he wanted should buy exactly the same loudspeakers he used in the development. Otherwise, yeah, it's a tone control, and in some cases, a very expensive tone control.
Yes, so I think you need to tell the difference in your reviews between amplifiers that will become a tone control into a speaker like that and amplifiers that won't. And you need to explain to people that sometimes the tone control amplifier with the right loudspeaker will give the right result. This was clearly a case where the flat amplifier was not the right result. When you want to talk about the interaction between measurements and listening, this was clearly an easily discernible listening difference, and the tube amplifier was clearly the right one for this. And the genius of it was that the retailer could say, you need a $4,000 tube amplifier to resolve the music properly and make it sound right on this speaker. No, you need an amplifier with a high enough output impedance so it would have the right response. You could have done the same thing by running the NAD through a resistor on the way to the speaker, and it would have sounded fine. So I think this was a thing that has been going on in the background for years, and it would be a very good thing to write about that and do these tests and explain to people what's going on.
Yay! I'd like to say one thing that I fully agree with what you're saying. However, the average audiophile doesn't want to hear that. And I can tell you, I've been doing double-blind tests forever. I've got a QSC ABX box. And by the way, doing a valid double-blind test is not little work. It takes a lot of work to do it properly.
I understand that. I know,
Yeah,
I've known from doing it myself.
Yeah, but what I'm getting at is that I think what you do by trying to say, well, this amplifier is totally flat and it will give you, what goes in comes out no matter what the speaker is you use. A lot of people are looking to play and to tweak and to use different components. And if you try to get it to that point, I have found out trying the same thing that you're doing, that they don't want to listen. It is a matter, again, of perception. I will give you an example of how bad that perception can be. I was at the Chicago audio group one year. I used to live in the Chicago area, and we were doing tests of power cables. And I said, well, if we're going to test the power cables, we need a reliable source of AC power and disturbance on the AC line. Make a long story short, I brought my Crown macro reference in mono mode and fed it with a very clean sine wave generator. And I added a known amount of noise. I injected it in the signal, set it to 120 volts RMS. We ran all the tests. And of course, we ran from standard IEC cables to $5,000 power cables. And of course, everybody thought the $5,000 cable had more slam, more detail, blah, blah, blah. And I almost didn't make it out of there alive when I told them when I did every one of the tests, I never changed the cables. And so that is what you're facing. I mean, you're facing people.
I did that at a BAS meeting like 10 years ago. I was going ABX comparison and I stopped, putting in the other one, and everything was AB, and I was saying it was ABX, and everybody, including the beloved Alvin, said, oh, I can hear the difference.
Well, getting back to the point I was trying to make, that I think a lot of high-end audio is about differentiation. Somebody says, I have this piece of equipment, you can't afford it, and therefore I'm better than you are. I have seen that with, I have a very good friend, David Burning, who makes very expensive vacuum tube amplifiers, and he was told by one of his dealers that, David, at $75,000 a pair, they're not expensive enough. So all I'm saying is that I have tried all my life to be very logical and very analytical about it, and I have more than once beat my head against a very hard wall.
Hey,
So
Tom, let John Atkinson have some feedback here.
What does Tom think about it? John think about it?
John.
Well, I have to say that if you're subjecting people to a blind test, but you're not changing the variable, you're cheating, because people are taking part in the test expecting there be a difference which they can or cannot identify. So if you don't change the variable, you're actually lying to them. I found that, I mean, give you an example. I ran a whole bunch of single blind amplifier tests at our hi-fi show in San Mateo in '89. They were single blind, but I wasn't operating the switch box, so you didn't get the clever hands effect. And I thought, well, what I'd do, I was going to do a series of forced choice trials. I think it was seven for each one, where it would be A or B or A or B. So I used a random number generator, and of course you get a number of selections where you would have 7 where the amplifier was never changed. So I thought, well, I can't use that, because people will start to guess, because they're thinking, well, it can't be, this is the 5th time I've heard this comparison and it can't be the same. So I'll say it was the other one. So you start randomizing your results. So you have to basically, you don't cheat the listeners. You can't, if you tell them that you're gonna switch between A and B, you are actually an X will be A or B. X will have to be A or B. Can't always be A.
That's not true. I disagree. I have a son who's a professor of cognitive science, and everything they do is a lie. They tell the subjects what they're going to look at, and then they change it to see if they can catch the fact that they're lying. Because there's no ethical standard here. This is science. If you suggest in advance that they're going to hear something, then you're establishing a confirmation bias.
No, you're not suggesting they're going to hear a difference. What you're saying is there will be a physical change which you might hear, you might not.
Then you
But if you
all,
don't make a physical change, you're just going to get randomized results.
all you have to do is say, we may or may not make a physical change. And your job is to detect whether you are.
Right, but if you then do a series where, say, 7 presentations, there's no physical change, the listeners start to doubt themselves, and that randomizes the scoring.
It's good for people to start doubting themselves because they're listening to bullshit all the time.
No, come on.
No,
I
no.
mean, you mentioned, who was it? You mentioned using the QSC AVX box. I
That was
used
me.
one of those back in 1984, and I thought, I want to hear if I can hear absolute polarity. So I created a test tone, which was asymmetrical, and used the AVX box to train myself. And I could do it, get up in the morning, get 9 out of 10, do it again, get 10 out of 10. I could hear the difference in absolute polarity on the asymmetric tone. No one believed me. No one. It was like, why did I bother? It's like, you were hearing things. You were cheating. It wasn't true AVX. But hey, I used the book to train myself.
It's not possible to cheat on an ABX test. You prove that you can hear it or you don't.
So I have another question for John. I do have another question. May I ask a question to John about his experience editing? So the problem I had when I read these reviews in Stereophile or other magazines was concerned that somebody might have a bad stereo day, which I have from time to time. No matter what I do, stereo doesn't satisfy. And then a few days later, the exact same stereo, same music, it's bliss. And so I'm probably a terrible person to do audio system reviews because I'm all over the map. But I've always wondered what your thoughts are on that topic, but also as an editor, when you receive a review of some piece of equipment and the poor manufacturer is entire payroll is dependent for the next year on favorable reviews from you guys. How you modulate that kind of reaction that you might see. What sorts of strategies you took to make sure that what was getting printed was something that was a reasonable take.
Well, what I used to do, and of course I don't do it now because I'm no longer the magazine's editor. I used to do show and tells. I used to visit the reviewers, oh, great to see you. Let's sit down. Can we listen to some music? And they'd be, relaxing and be playing their music and I'd be listening. And I'd be listening to see if what they were describing in the review is what I was hearing. So I was basically acting as QC. And, obviously it's easier to do. I'm based in Brooklyn, so it's a lot easier to do with the East Coast reviewers than it was to do with those in California and Washington. But nevertheless, I used to travel out there and, not saying I'm testing you as a reviewer. It was a social occasion, but actually it was a show and tell. And that's what I used to do. I used to do it at Hi-Fi News as well. I don't know how many editors do that. But you're right. I mean, the system changes. I mean, I wonder if, sometimes it's just due to the fact that everybody in the neighborhood turns on a power drill at the same time. And so, so you get all the noise on the AC line.
Background noise, acoustic background noise changes widely in most neighborhoods as the day goes by.
Yeah, I mean, I can't listen in the early afternoon because that's when people are picking up their children from school. My room is very quiet, except between 2 and 3 every afternoon when all the traffic is going by as the people driving to the school to pick up their children.
All right, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
One of the things that I've always noticed is, and I recall, I believe it was during the good old days of Shop Talk with Dr. Goldwater and Peter Mitchell, but the comment was made that if you really want to understand what you're listening to, go listen to live concerts. Spend a lot of time learning what live concerts sound like. The difficulty there, of course, is the venue. And the performing organization. But yeah, if you start listening to live music, especially if you focus on one genre, I think, John, you've probably got a situation where you listen to pop, you play a bass guitar, you play violin, you've got a broad spectrum, pardon the pun, of music types and musical venues to deal with. And you probably get a wide variation in terms of what is an acceptable sound to hear. And, when you're exposed, like I am, mostly to classical music, because it's what I like, the venue makes a big difference, just like the room does when you're playing it back. The other aspect on this is most of us are listening to recorded music. Well, how the hell was it recorded? Who did the recording? What kind of equipment did it pass through? I mean, there's a big flap about, well, it was transformerless. Well, no, we used, UTC transformers or whatever. And there's a game there too, in terms of what kind of processing did the producers of the music album you're listening to go through? And is that what you expect to hear, or is that what they expect you to hear? And they're different because the sound systems are different. The venue for playback editing or recording is different. It's a crazy space, and I don't think you'll ever find any two people that really think that it sounds identical in each of their listening rooms. It's kind of a heavy thought, but there are so many variables in here that could play any which way you want, really. And it's really a matter of, it boils down to what do you like to listen to? Where do you like to hear it? And what do you, and then how does it play back when you're listening to an actual recording of something like that, in terms of what the producers did when they made the recording? I'll shut up.
Well, you're touching on a very deep subject, which is recording photography or is it painting? And they said I started off as a Blumlein purist, thinking that I just had to capture the picture of the music of the performers. I abandoned that. The recording art is painting. You're creating something which can be totally artificial, but will convince listeners that they are listening to an original event, which may have never existed. That's a very complicated subject.
That's wonderful. I love that.
I like that. I like that analogy too.
There's a great book by a writer called Evan Eisenberg called The Recording Angel, which is, the whole book is about that subject.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. And it's true, because even when I do recordings, I'm trying to capture what I perceive as being the sound of the space and the organization.
Yeah,
and my impression.
Now that's why I love ambient recovery music, reproduction, because it really makes the differences in the recording less important. It's averaging out, like equal temperament. It averages out all the little distinctions, so that you are creating an image that paints the image like a Van Gogh, which looks better than reality.
Well, it's also what you want to hear.
Well, I didn't know that until I heard it. I had to do it. I did it. I created the reality that I'm listening to. And I couldn't tell in advance what was going to satisfy me. I had to learn based on my experiences in Symphony Hall, Boston, and in a few jazz clubs, what it actually sounds like to listen to these people. For example, there's a group called Rova, the saxophone quartet, which creates the most amazing sounds I've ever heard from four guys. And I heard them in a club, and it was all amplified, but I know what it sounded like in the club, to hear it amplified in the club. Each saxophone playing into a microphone, and I can make it sound like that in my room. Now, of course, it's 20 years ago, so I can't prove anything. But all you have to do is not get so analytical into the two stereo speakers that you can allow yourself to be creative, because you're creating an image. You're painting an image. The audiophile is creating an image in your room, in your head. And you learn what especially if you remember what music used to sound like when there was music, if you remembered that, then you are able to have some standard that what you're reproducing and what you're creating has some verisimilitude. It's the verisimilitude that you want to reproduce.
Hey, John, you want to respond? And Les Williams, I think you have something.
I just wanted John to repeat the author and the title of that book again.
Yeah, the book is called The Recording Angel by Evan Eisenberg. Actually, I can show you the cover. I can find it.
I assume the books are pushed in and out to make a quadratic diffuser.
That's a good one, Brad.
Yeah, sorry, I can't find it. It's called The Recording Angel. It's in the second edition by Evan Eisenberg. And as I said, what I'll do is I'll email Alvin with links to download that Dream of Drontius recording and a couple of other recordings I've made that haven't been released, and also links to some of the articles I've written on this subject.
Is there any relation to Angel Records?
No.
I've Googled Angel Recording and I got Angel Records.
No, it's called The Recording Angel.
The Recording Angel.
In fact, somebody just on the chat screen just pointed out.
Yep.
I would just like to perhaps add that every artist knows what his medium is, and he is recording for that medium. Like a movie producer knows that it's going to be shown on a big screen. A TV producer maybe produces for a smaller screen. A recording engineer knows generally what kind of systems it'll be played on, but that's one of his major problems is he doesn't really know that. Depending on the market, maybe a guy is recording for the hi-fi enthusiast and he knows what that'll sound like. And one is recording for a pop record and that'll sound a little bit different because it'll be played on a boom box. So generally you're recording and producing for your medium.
Right.
Larry, I think boom boxes have passed out of fashion. I think it's all headphones and earbuds now.
Yeah, it's earbuds.
I just bought the last copy on Amazon.
Yeah.
Thank you. Your order has been placed.
Yeah, they say there's only one left in stock. Order now.
Yeah, so I did. I take orders.
I just want to say that when I'm recording something, I can't wait till I get home and play it back.
There's a difference between cognition and recognition.
Yeah.
Recognition implies the knower and the known. Cognition just implies knowing. And we as audiophiles work on both domains. We have an objective audio, and we are also the file who loves what we audio.
Yeah, objective and subjective.
That's right.
So, John, well, I lament too that, the trends for stereo are lamentable. The stereo equipment becomes really expensive on the high end, and people don't seem to be interested to support a large, thriving industry, at least one that resembles one that I knew 20 or 30 years ago. But at the same time, this fabulous change, which is effectively limitless access to a music library that you can't possibly listen to in any lifetime, is at our fingertips. So there's got to be some good there. And my question for you is, do you see any way to harness this incredible change and reinvigorate the stereo world with this library that we have access to?
Yeah, I mean, with Tidal and Qobuz, the world's music is right there. I mean, certainly for us, it's wonderful. We all grew up as collectors. We had record collections. People don't have record collections anymore because it's all in the cloud. It's all streamed. And I'm very conscious of my own listening habits. So even though I have thousands of CDs and thousands of LPs and still plenty of essay CDs and even some DVDs, most of my music these days is streaming. And that's sort of, that's a new thing for my generation, because I said we all grew up as collectors. I don't know what the impact it will have on younger people. I mean, Spotify seems to have done a huge change in, you know, in younger people's listening habits, although they're listening on their phone with earbuds. Maybe as those young people get older and they'll get exposed. Well, first of all, they'll start earning money, more money, and second, they'll start to realize there's more. And I mean, if 1% of all the people under 30 go down that path, that's a healthy market, right?
That's a lot of stereos.
Well, what's happening with the circulation at the magazine over time? Was there a period?
It hit 92,000 at the end of the last century, and then slowly went down to about 70,000, where it stayed for years. I have no idea what it is right now. Yeah, I just don't know. As I said, it was plateauing around 70 for like the first 15 years of this century, and I don't know what it is now. I'd like to think it's good.
Well, your advertisement, judging by the thickness of the magazine only, seems to have remained fairly consistent except for a few periods. True?
Yes, I mean, there's a big seasonal variation. You know, July and August is always thin. November, December, January is always thick. April and October are thick because we have the recommended components feature in those issues. Yeah, I mean, it's still a good thick book. And as I said, the current owners, AV-Tech, are very supportive of Stereophile's content and its ethos.
Well, what is the likelihood of you guys looking at the testing loudspeakers with the M noise?
Well, as I said, Alvin, I'm going to look into it. See what use it will be. I mean, I have to say that for domestic playback, where you're listening at levels typically not more than about 90 dB, with 90 dB average, peak a little higher than that. Big speakers will always do that better than small speakers, but no, I'm not sure yet of the value of an actual M noise spec to be included in reviews. As I said, I'll check it out.
John, it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you very much.
Oh, Richard, it's a pleasure. We've met before, I'm sure.
If we didn't, we should have.
Thank you, John. I'll see you later, perhaps.
Yes, good to see you again, Brad.
One pitfall of this M noise I want to mention is the signal extends down to 10 hertz. And that's going to be a problem for most loudspeakers. So you have to be very careful about a high pass filter for that signal.
The specification takes that into account. In other words, when the manufacturer posts his results, he tells you about where in the low end that he decided to stop the test.
Right, but that filter is not a part of the standard.
But it is accepted because when they post their own results, they include the 645 hertz roll-off. And they specified that it is. That should also be specified.
But it's going to be different for different manufacturers and makes it very much harder to compare. That's all.
Yeah.
Well, it's like RMS, when it first came out, we're all old enough to remember that. It was a welcome addition to looking at amplifiers. Even though we know that all amplifiers, manufacturers don't necessarily use the statistic properly, but the answer is there when it comes to magazines that measure it.
This is not an issue in the pro world because different manufacturers all have different high pass, and they specify that when you buy the speaker. the range is all over from 25 to 55 hertz. They specify the high pass. And the AM noise spec says, oh, all right, if you're going to high pass your speaker, when you do the AM noise test, then when you publish the result, you need to say what you high passed it. So it's effectively not an issue.
It all works if they're transparent about that filter.
Well, does anybody have any more questions? Because I haven't had my dinner yet.
Oh dear.
Okay, well, I want to thank you, John. It's been very interesting and exciting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you
Excellent
very
job.
much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure. The last physical meeting of the Boston Audio Society I went to, I think, was in 1984. So it's been good to catch up with you all again.
The sad part is that most of us were there too.
Well, I think I wrote a few years back when I was 40, I tended to be the youngest person in the audience at a classical concert, and now I'm in my 70s. I'm still one of the youngest people in the audience.
Love it. Love it.
That's in the days when we used to go to concerts instead of doing it on screen, which I think the last concert I went to was a Mass by Bach, January 2020. Haven't been to a live concert since. Miss it a lot.
Soon
We're
we all
almost
hope.
there.
Yeah.
So hopefully by the fall, we'll be back to able to at least attend concerts.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Thanks
Okay,
very
well,
much,
thank you,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure.
Good to see everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right.